The galaxy had long moved on without Earth, or at least that was what most of the powerful empires believed. For 2.5 centuries there had been no voice, no signal, and no sound from the small blue planet that once shook the stars with its stubborn will. Some called it forgotten, others called it dead, and with each passing generation, the silence became proof that humanity had ended itself. In meetings of the Council, great alien rulers would laugh at the very mention of Earth, their voices echoing across massive chambers as they told stories of a world that burned itself into silence. They pointed to their own growing fleets, their expanding colonies, and their mighty cities floating between stars as proof of their superiority. But beneath the laughter there were always uneasy glances, a quiet dread that lingered like smoke after fire, for even silence can be heavy, and the silence of Earth was heavier than any war cry. Whispers moved through the trade routes and military stations, whispers that refused to die even after centuries. Some believed Earth had chosen silence, that it had gone underground, watching, waiting, preparing for something the rest of the galaxy could not understand. Others claimed the humans had vanished completely, but then asked themselves, how could a species that survived on a death world simply vanish? A species that had turned fire into engines, storms into energy, and war into survival. The kind of people who thrived where others would die? The silence of Earth was strange, too perfect, too controlled, like the calm before a storm. In the council chamber, the subject of Earth was little more than a joke on most days. Alien leaders sat on high thrones made of crystal, steel, or bone, their voices deep with arrogance as they mocked the memory of humanity. They spoke of humans as reckless creatures, undisciplined and wild, a danger to themselves more than to others. They told young cadets that Earth was a lesson in failure, a planet that consumed itself with endless wars until it had nothing left. Yet when the name of Earth was spoken, a strange silence always followed, as if even the walls of the council feared to carry the word too far. Far from the council, in a lonely listening post near the edge of known space, a young alien officer sat in his chair, his claws tapping against the console as he replayed old recordings stored in forgotten archives. The records were damaged, lines of static breaking through ancient human words, but the tone, the sharp edge of defiance in those voices made his scales tighten with unease. The last known transmission from Earth had never been fully understood, only fragments survived, lines that sounded like a promise, or a warning, we will not, then static. When the time comes, then silence again. The young officer leaned closer, his ears twitching as the static crackled, each burst sounding like whispers hidden behind noise, and though he could not understand the full meaning, he felt it deep inside. This was not the voice of a people defeated, it was the voice of a people waiting. For nights, he returned to the archives, replaying the broken transmission, studying the flicker of old human faces captured in the last visual broadcast. Their eyes steady, their expressions calm yet fierce, as if they knew something the rest of the galaxy did not. He asked himself why the humans would fall silent so suddenly, why their fleets disappeared from the trade routes, why their colonies sent no replies. And each time his thoughts circled back to the same conclusion. Perhaps Earth had not died. Perhaps Earth had chosen. The galaxy, vast and full of powerful empires, was never free of fear. Even the strongest feared what they could not see, what they could not predict. And Earth had become the greatest shadow of all. A planet that once screamed across the stars, now quiet as a tomb, yet still burning in memory. Pirates told tales of ghost ships near the Sol system, glowing with strange lights before vanishing without trace. Traders swore they felt eyes watching their vessels when passing the empty sector, and soldiers whispered that if Earth ever returned, no empire would be ready. The young officer could not laugh like his elders in the council, for when he listened to the broken voice of humanity, his chest grew tight with a feeling he could not name. It was not just fear, it was expectation, the kind of feeling before a storm when the air grows heavy, before a volcano erupts when the ground trembles beneath silent Earth. He looked out from the station window at the sea of stars and whispered to himself, what if they are still there? What if they are listening? What if? The silence is not the end, but the beginning. And as he sat alone, with static hissing softly in his ears like a breath hidden in the dark, he did not know that across the galaxy others were asking the same questions, that rulers who laughed by day woke in the night from dreams of human voices calling their names, that soldiers polished their weapons a little more carefully when they thought of Earth, that entire empires, though they denied it with their words, lived with a quiet unease deep in their hearts. For Earth's silence was not natural, It was chosen, and chosen silence is the most dangerous of all. The galaxy had almost forgotten Earth, but Earth had not forgotten the galaxy, and one day, when the silence ended, nothing would ever be the same again. The council chamber was filled with a restless energy as voices of dozens of alien races echoed across the tall walls, their words overlapping, arguments rising like a storm. The subject of Earth had returned to the table, dragged into discussion not because of proof, but because of whispers that refused to die. For centuries the galaxy had treated Earth like a ghost, yet now the silence itself was being debated as if it were a weapon. Some leaders scoffed loudly, claiming that Earth had ended long ago, its silence nothing more than the ashes of a species that had destroyed itself. They waved their hands and tails, their jeweled robes glittering under the crystal lights, mocking the very idea that humans could still exist. They compared Earth to a ruin swallowed by dust, a monument to failure. But even as they mocked, others sat silently, their eyes dark and thoughtful, and their silence carried more weight than words. One elder, his voice low and trembling, reminded the council that humans had been underestimated before. He spoke of wars long past when humanity, though outnumbered and outgunned, fought with ferocity that defied reason. He reminded them of battles where humans turned defeat into victory through nothing but stubborn courage, and he asked what kind of species could endure such endless struggle. The chamber quieted for a moment, the younger rulers shifting in their seats, unwilling to meet each other's gaze. It was true, the humans had always been different, and the memory of their defiance had never fully died. The silence of Earth, he warned, should not be taken as weakness, but as patience, as planning. His words echoed, chilling some and enraging others, for fear always hides behind anger. Far from the grand chamber, ordinary citizens in distant colonies spoke in hushed voices of Earth. Merchants in busy markets whispered of new rumors that had spread from the edge of Sol. Travelers swore they had seen strange signals in their scanners when passing near the old human system, faint pulses like heartbeats in the dark. Pirates claimed that ships who dared wander too close disappeared without trace, swallowed by shadows. Mothers told their children stories of humanity, not as heroes, but as monsters waiting beneath the stars. The fear was spreading faster than the council's laughter could erase it, because silence itself is contagious, and the silence of Earth seemed alive. Back in the chamber, the arguments grew harsher. A proud warlord slammed his armored fist on the table, declaring that if Earth dared return, his fleets would crush them in a single strike, burn the planet until nothing but glass remained. His words were met with roars of approval from some, but with narrowed eyes and uneasy whispers from others. For those who studied history knew that threats against Earth had been made before, and those who carried them out had paid dearly. The council chamber was thick with arrogance, but beneath it was a trembling layer of doubt, and everyone could feel it. Among them, one voice was different. A young commander, newly risen to power, dared to ask the question others avoided. What if their silence is not weakness? What if it is preparation? What if every year, every decade of silence has been used to build something we cannot imagine? His words fell heavy into the chamber. For a moment, no one spoke, the very air seemed to tighten. Then the chamber erupted again, louder than before, for nothing frightens rulers more than the thought of an enemy they cannot see. As the debate raged on, messages arrived from frontier stations. Reports of faint transmissions, signals impossible to explain, shadows of language hidden in the static of deep space. The council dismissed them as tricks, malfunctions, lies spread by smugglers, but inside their hearts the unease grew. The youngest among them wondered why the reports always spoke of voices that sounded human, calm and measured, as if someone was speaking from behind the silence, testing the waters before stepping into the light. In one corner of the chamber, an ancient archivist clutched his scrolls of data and dared to speak. His voice cracked, but his words were steady. He told them that Earth's last message, though broken, had never been fully studied, that fragments remained in archives across the galaxy. He reminded them that the humans were masters of saying more than they revealed, that their words always carried hidden meanings. The council tried to silence him, but his words stuck like thorns in their minds. If Earth's last voice had been a warning, then perhaps the silence itself was the answer. Beyond the walls of power, fleets began subtle preparations. Warlords who laughed in council quietly reinforced their borders. Colonies closest to Sol increased their defenses. Merchants rerouted their trade paths away from the silent system. No one admitted it, but all of them feared what silence might hide. Silence is not empty, it is filled with everything unspoken, and Earth's silence had stretched for too long, too perfectly, to be natural. The young alien officer in the lonely listening post continued to replay the static each night, hearing whispers no one else believed in. He felt the weight of something approaching, like thunder rolling far beyond the horizon. The galaxy debated, mocked, and feared, but in his heart he felt certain. Silence was not the end of Earth, it was only the beginning. And in the quiet corners of the galaxy, in dreams and in shadows, the name of Earth was spoken once again, not as a dead world, but as a storm waiting to break. The night was quiet in the lonely listening post on the edge of known space. The young alien officer sat half asleep at his console, the endless hum of machinery filling the silence, when suddenly the monitors flickered and his claws froze midair. A sound unlike static pierced through the usual noise, clear and sharp, a pulse that made the hair along his spine rise. He leaned forward, eyes wide, adjusting the controls, and then he heard it, faint but undeniable, words forming from the darkness, words in human tongue. His breath caught as the voice spoke, steady and calm, carrying no fear and no hesitation. "We are awake." The three words cut deeper than any weapon. They echoed across the chamber, vibrating through the consoles, and for a long moment he could not move. He could only stare at the lines of green light dancing across his screens, recording the impossible. Alarms rang through the outpost as his report was transmitted. Officers rushed into the room, their scales pale with shock as they too heard the message replay again and again, each repetition colder than the last. The silence of 2.5 centuries had been broken not by pleas, not by cries for help, but by a simple declaration that felt like thunder in their bones. The officer's superior shouted for immediate transmission to the High Council. The data was sent through secure channels, but already whispers raced ahead, carried by frightened voices to nearby stations and merchant ships. The words were spreading faster than any fleet could fly, and across the stars, civilizations froze to listen. On a distant colony, a group of miners huddled around an old radio, their dirty hands trembling as the faint voice repeated, "We are awake." They looked at each other in silence. For none dared laugh, none dared speak against what they felt, that something vast and unstoppable had returned. On a bustling trade station, merchants stopped their business, their eyes fixed on screens replaying the signal, and the sound of coins and deals fell silent. In the homes of alien citizens across countless worlds, children asked their parents what the words meant, and the parents, who had grown up with tales of human fury whispered in fear, found no answer to give. When the report reached the council chamber, chaos erupted. The rulers who had mocked Earth now shouted over one another, their voices rising in anger and fear. Some claimed the signal was fake, a trick spread by rivals. Others demanded fleets be sent at once to confirm it. But beneath their arguments lay a single truth none could deny: the silence was broken. The young commander who had once asked the forbidden question, what if Earth had been preparing, now stood with his head bowed, for he knew the answer had arrived. The elder who had warned them before spoke again, his frail voice cutting through the noise like a blade. They were never gone, they were waiting, and now they have chosen to speak. The chamber fell into tense silence, each leader hearing the words they had feared for centuries. In the frontier zones, panic began to spread. Small empires closest to Sol gathered their fleets, their leaders issuing urgent commands to strengthen defenses, though none admitted it was fear of Earth. Pirates abandoned the region altogether, unwilling to risk being the first to encounter what lay hidden on the silent world. Even the strongest powers, though boasting in public, secretly ordered scouts to avoid the human system, their pride cracking under the weight of 3 words that could not be forgotten. "We are awake." The young officer who had first heard the message sat alone after the others had left, replaying the recording until the words burned into his mind, his chest heavy with a mixture of awe and dread. It was not the sound of a people asking for recognition, nor of a species weakly returning to life. It was the sound of a predator opening its eyes after a long sleep. He stared out at the void, whispering softly to himself, They were watching, all this time. They were waiting for this moment. He felt the universe had shifted, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from silence and dropped onto every star. Rumors grew wild as the days passed, stories of human fleets hidden beneath oceans, of weapons that could silence suns, of cities buried deep inside mountains where the descendants of humanity had trained in secret. Some claimed the humans had allied with forces unknown, powers outside the galaxy itself. Others believed they had evolved beyond flesh, becoming something more. No one knew the truth, but fear thrived in the unknown, and Earth's silence had already been long enough to let fear grow without limits. The Council finally declared an emergency summit, summoning leaders from every corner of the galaxy. But even as they gathered, distrust boiled between them. Some demanded preemptive war, to strike Earth before its true power could rise, while others trembled at the thought, warning that to attack would be to awaken a storm none could survive. Old alliances cracked as the question of Earth divided them, and the chamber that once laughed at the dead world now shook with terror. Back at the listening post, the officer woke one night to another flicker on his monitor, another signal. His claws shook as he adjusted the dial, the static cleared, and once again a voice spoke in human tongue. "Stand by." 2 words this time, heavier than the first, a command, not a request. He leaned back in his chair, his body numb, his heart thundering in his chest. The silence had ended, but the waiting had just begun. And somewhere, far across the dark, on the small blue planet that had been forgotten, eyes opened, watching, as the galaxy held its breath. Fear spread faster than light. It moved from world to world like a shadow carried on whispers. The words of Earth's first signal replayed in every station, in every colony, and in every council hall, "We are awake," followed by the second message, "Stand by." No empire could deny it any longer. Earth had broken its silence, and the galaxy trembled. On border colonies closest to the Sol system, panic erupted. Families packed their belongings and begged transport ships to take them away from the edge. Even merchants who once traded fearlessly rerouted their ships far from the human star, losing profit but choosing survival over wealth. The leaders of great empires stood before their people, cloaked in arrogance, promising safety and boasting of fleets that stretched across the stars. But their eyes told a different story. Behind closed doors they gathered in secret chambers, voices low, hands shaking as they read reports of strange signals around Sol, of faint shadows moving across long-range scanners. Some claimed they saw the shape of massive ships rising from Earth's orbit, but every report ended the same way: silence. Returned the moment they tried to investigate. The myths of old wars came alive once more, stories passed down from veterans who had once fought humanity centuries ago. Tales of human soldiers who refused to fall even when outnumbered, of pilots who turned broken ships into weapons, of commanders who led with sheer will instead of fear. Generals who had once laughed at such stories now read them in private, their minds racing with unease. For what if the silence had been used to create something greater than before? What if the humans had turned their world into a fortress no one could enter? In the great council chamber, the tension grew unbearable. The same rulers who had mocked Earth now shouted at one another. Some demanded an immediate strike to crush the planet before its people revealed their strength. Others cried out in warning, saying an attack would only awaken the storm. But all agreed on one truth. Humanity was no longer forgotten, their silence had ended, and nothing would ever return to normal. The elder who had once warned of Earth's patience rose again, his frail body trembling, but his voice clear. "You do not understand. They did not sleep, they prepared, and if they are speaking now, it is because they are ready." His words sent a chill through the chamber, yet many covered their fear with anger, blaming rivals, accusing one another of spreading lies. Meanwhile, on distant worlds, children were told frightening bedtime stories of humans returning, of ships darker than space itself moving like shadows, of voices that spoke without sound. Soldiers cleaned their weapons more carefully, though many wondered if their weapons would matter at all, and spies whispered of strange disappearances near Sol, scouts who never returned, fleets that lost contact, ships that sent one last desperate message before vanishing into static. The fear of Earth had become larger than Earth itself. It was no longer just a planet. It was an idea, an invisible hand pressing down on every empire. The young officer at the listening post had not slept in days, his eyes bloodshot as he replayed the recordings over and over again. "We are awake, stand by." The words burned into his mind. Sometimes he thought he heard more hidden beneath the static, faint echoes, fragments of voices layered behind the clear message, as if Earth was saying far more than anyone could understand. He wrote down everything, every pulse, every break in the signal, convinced that the humans were speaking in codes too deep for their ears to hear. His commanders dismissed him, telling him to rest, but in his heart he knew that Earth was not just speaking. It was warning, and the warning was not meant for just one empire. It was meant for all. In hidden bunkers beneath alien capitals, rulers met in secret, speaking not as enemies but as frightened beings facing something they could not measure. Some proposed alliances to prepare for the unknown, others demanded weapons powerful enough to destroy entire planets. And yet none dared send fleets into Sol again, for fear of what they might find. The galaxy was paralyzed, caught between pride and terror, waiting for Earth's next word, as if the silence of centuries had shifted into a game no one else understood. One night, as the officer sat alone watching the stars, he asked himself why Earth had chosen those words. Why not say more? Why not declare war or peace? Why not explain their silence? But the more he thought, the more he realized that simplicity was the true weapon. "We are awake" meant they had never been gone, only watching, stand by, meant they controlled the timing. The galaxy was no longer in charge. The galaxy was waiting for humanity's next move. He shivered as he looked at the blue star that marked Sol on his map, knowing in his heart that when the next message came, it would not just be words, it would be the beginning of something far greater than fear. And across the galaxy, in palaces, in stations, and in the cold silence of space, millions of beings lay awake at night, their thoughts circling back to the same truth. Earth had spoken, and their silence was far more powerful than any fleet, their words heavier than any weapon. And now, as the stars seemed to hold their breath, everyone waited, because deep down they all knew the same thing. The silence was never weakness, it was the warning before the storm. The first sighting came from a patrol ship stationed near the edge of the Sol system. The crew had grown used to empty scans and silent skies. For centuries nothing had stirred near the human star, but on that day their sensors blinked with strange light. A signal not like any they had seen before. At first they thought it was a malfunction, a ghost echo in the void, but then the shape appeared, faint at first, then clearer, something moving in orbit around Earth. The crew stared in disbelief as the image formed, a ship unlike any design recorded in the galaxy's archives, its hull dark and gleaming as though made of metal and stone fused together, glowing lines of energy pulsing across its frame like veins, as if the vessel itself was alive. The patrol captain felt his throat tighten as he ordered the scanners to magnify. The ship was massive, not a battleship in the traditional sense, but something older, heavier, a machine that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. It bore scars along its surface, deep marks as though it had survived wars long forgotten. Yet the scars had not weakened it, they had become part of its armor. The engines flared with a light that disrupted their sensors, bending readings, making the instruments stutter with confusion. One officer whispered that it looked less like a ship and more like a predator waking from its sleep. The patrol attempted to send a standard greeting, their voices trembling as the message traveled across the void. But the human vessel gave no reply, it simply drifted, its glowing lines pulsing like a heartbeat. Suddenly the patrol systems flickered, lights died, screens went black, and the ship trembled as if caught in a storm. Yet no storm was visible, no weapon was fired. The patrol captain shouted for control. Officers scrambled to reset systems, but everything froze. For nearly a full minute, their vessel hung powerless in the void. And then, as suddenly as it began, the lights returned, the systems rebooted, and the patrol's instruments blinked back to life. The human ship had not moved. It had simply reminded them that it could silence them at will. The captain sent a desperate message to the nearest station, his voice hoarse, describing what he had seen, and within hours the sighting spread across the stars, carried by frightened voices and urgent reports. The galaxy now had proof. Earth was no longer silent, and their silence had hidden more than words, it had hidden power. The image of the ship replayed in council chambers, its glowing veins studded frame by frame, and no empire could deny what they saw. Some rulers tried to dismiss it as an illusion, a trick of failing scanners, but deep inside they knew the truth. This was the beginning. The Great Council was thrown into uproar. Leaders shouted louder than ever, demanding answers. Some called for fleets to march into Sol and surround the planet before the humans could rise. Others argued in panic that any aggression would doom them all. The elder spoke again, his frail voice almost drowned by the chaos. "Do you not see? They have shown us only one ship, and already you tremble. What do you think waits beneath their oceans? In their mountains? In their skies?" They did not disappear, they prepared. His words silenced the chamber, though no one admitted they believed him, but the fear in their eyes betrayed them. On distant colonies, the news caused riots, some prayed for mercy, others cursed their leaders for mocking Earth for so long. Children clung to their parents as the image of the human ship played again and again on public screens, the glowing lines across its hull haunting the dreams of millions. Soldiers trained harder, though in their hearts they wondered if their training meant anything, if their weapons would matter against a force that could shut down ships without firing a shot. The young officer at the listening post watched the footage in silence, his hands trembling as he replayed the signals sent from the patrol, the static that came before the ship appeared, the faint hum that followed. He studied it for hours, convinced there were patterns hidden within the sound, as though Earth's silence still carried messages only the patient could hear. When he finally looked up from his screens, he felt a shiver crawl through his body, for he realized something that chilled him more than the sight of the ship itself. The humans had allowed themselves to be seen. The patrol could have been destroyed, their ship could have been silenced forever, yet they had been spared, their systems returned, their lives untouched, and only one phrase followed the event. A single transmission that came hours later, carried on every frequency, clear and cold in human tongue: "Stand by." The galaxy froze as the words repeated. No threat, no explanation, just a command. The waiting was worse than war, for war was predictable. But waiting meant humanity chose the timing, and no one else could control it. Rumors spread that this was not the only ship, that deep beneath Earth's oceans fleets were hidden, vessels larger and stronger waiting for the call, that underground cities stretched across the planet, training generations of soldiers in silence. Others whispered that humans had harnessed forces unknown, bending energy in ways that even the oldest empires could not match. No proof existed, yet the fear was enough, for fear needed no proof, only silence and imagination. Across the galaxy, the stars seemed quieter than ever. Fleets stood ready yet unwilling to move, rulers argued yet made no decision, and citizens whispered in the shadows, all waiting for Earth's next move. The first ship had appeared, and it had spoken without speaking. It had shown the galaxy that silence was not weakness but strength, and now the universe understood a truth it had long tried to forget. When Earth spoke, everything changed. The galaxy could not rest after the first ship appeared. Its image haunted every council chamber, every military base, and every home where frightened citizens gathered around glowing screens. Even though the vessel had not fired a single shot, even though no fleet had marched out from Earth's orbit, the fear it inspired was greater than the aftermath of any battle. It was not only the size of the ship or the strange light running through its hull. It was the silence that surrounded it, the quiet confidence of a predator that did not need to roar to be feared. The patrol that had witnessed it firsthand returned shaken, their voices trembling when they described the way their own systems had shut down without warning. They swore that their ship felt powerless, like a child before a giant, and their testimony spread faster than any official report. Rumors soon filled the void where facts were absent. Some claimed the humans had built entire fleets during their 2.5 centuries of silence, fleets hidden deep beneath Earth's oceans where no eyes could see. Others whispered of vast cities buried under mountains, stretching for miles underground, where generations of humans had lived in secret, training and preparing. A few even believed the humans were no longer entirely flesh, that they had fused themselves with their machines, becoming something more than mortal, something the galaxy had no name for. None of these tales could be proven, yet the fear they carried was enough to make entire empires shake. In the Great Council, the divisions widened. Some rulers demanded unity, urging all empires to stand together before humanity revealed its true power. Others, swollen with pride but hollow with fear, insisted on preemptive strikes, to destroy Earth before its silence unleashed an unstoppable storm. But the oldest among them shook their heads, warning that to strike blindly would mean suicide. They argued that Earth had shown restraint, that if humanity had wanted war, it would already have begun. The younger rulers scoffed, but deep inside they wondered the same thing. Ordinary people across countless worlds felt the weight of Earth's silence pressing upon them. In schools, teachers no longer laughed at the old tales of human ferocity. Instead, they taught their students with hushed voices, warning them never to underestimate a species born from fire and storms. In military academies, cadets read battle reports from centuries past, and many trembled at the stubborn courage of humans who fought on even when defeat was certain. Soldiers whispered that no training could prepare them for what was coming. For how do you fight an enemy who hides in silence until the moment they choose to strike? The young officer at the listening post became obsessed, replaying the signals over and over, scribbling notes in the margins of old data sheets. The words "we are awake" and "stand by" burned into his mind like brands. He began to notice patterns in the static, strange pulses that repeated with precision, too ordered to be random. His superiors dismissed his claims, calling them the fantasies of an overworked mind. But he knew in his heart the humans were sending hidden messages, codes buried within the silence, communicating in ways the galaxy could not yet understand. He felt like a witness to something vast and terrible, something only the patient would see. And then came the second sighting. A fleet of scouts from a proud empire, determined to prove that the humans were nothing but ghosts, approached Sol with arrogance. Their ships were sleek, armed with the latest weapons. Their commanders loud with boasts. But the fleet never returned. Their last transmission was cut off mid-sentence, static swallowing their words, and then silence, the kind of silence that freezes the blood. The Empire claimed their fleet had suffered a natural disaster, but whispers spread quickly. Everyone knew where they had gone, and everyone feared what had met them there. Fear began to tear alliances apart. Old rivals accused each other of siding with Earth, of hiding secret pacts. Trade routes collapsed as merchants refused to pass anywhere near human space. Civilizations that had once mocked Earth now built fortifications along their borders. Yet even as they armed themselves, they admitted quietly that no wall could stop a predator once it decided to hunt. The council gathered once more, but this time the chamber was heavy with dread. The elder stood and spoke slowly, his eyes filled with sorrow. "You do not understand," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber. "They have not returned to fight for survival. They have survived already. Now they return to remind the galaxy of what it has forgotten. That silence is not death, it is strength. That patience is not weakness, it is power. For 2.5 centuries, Earth has prepared. And now they are ready." His words silenced even the loudest rulers, and for the first time in centuries, none dared laugh at Earth's name. That night, across the galaxy, countless beings lay awake, staring into the dark of their ceilings, imagining ships rising from oceans, cities carved beneath mountains, soldiers trained in shadows. The thought spread like fire. If one ship had appeared, how many more waited, unseen and unheard, hidden in the silence of Earth? The galaxy, once proud and unshaken, now held its breath, waiting for the next move, knowing that the silence of Earth had never been empty. It had always been the warning before the storm. The day came without warning, no sign in the skies, no tremor in the stars, only a sudden stillness that swept across the galaxy as if time itself had paused. Ships froze in their paths, stations flickered with interference, communication channels stuttered with static. Across countless worlds, beings looked to the sky, sensing something was about to break the silence. And then it happened. A voice, clear and unmistakable, spread across every channel at once. It was not the rough static of hidden codes nor the faint pulse of secret signals. It was human, calm and strong, echoing in every tongue through perfect translation. "We were silent to learn," the voice said, steady as stone. "We were silent to grow. Now we speak, and you will listen." In that instant, the galaxy changed. Crowds gathered in the streets, staring up at projection screens where the words repeated. Soldiers dropped their drills to listen, and leaders in their grand palaces froze in shock. The voice did not shout, it did not threaten, yet it carried more weight than any army. Every empire, every colony, every lonely station heard the same message. It was as if Earth had reached into the heart of the galaxy and pressed its hand against every mind, reminding them of what they had forgotten. In the council chamber, the rulers sat pale and trembling, their voices caught in their throats. For years they had mocked the silence, for months they had feared the signals, but nothing had prepared them for the power of hearing humanity's voice again. Some tried to speak, to dismiss it as an illusion, but the words were already carved into their hearts. Humanity had not begged, had not asked, had not threatened, they had commanded. The chamber was silent, not by choice, but by instinct, as if the galaxy itself was listening. Across the outer colonies, riots broke out, not in anger but in terror. Citizens rushed to spaceports, demanding passage away from the edge-world's nearest sol. Merchants abandoned trade routes entirely, their ships fleeing to safer sectors. Soldiers muttered among themselves, their confidence shaken, for they had trained for war against enemies they could see, not for an enemy that spoke with such certainty. Even warlords, proud and cruel, felt unease as the words echoed again and again, "Now we speak, and you will listen." The young officer at the listening post sat in stunned silence, his claws pressed to the console as tears of fear stung his eyes. He had always suspected Earth's silence was chosen, that it was preparation, but hearing the voice made him realize the scale of it. They had not been preparing for survival. They had been preparing to lead. He whispered to himself as the words repeated, "They are not asking for space, they are taking it." The realization made his chest tighten with dread. Rumors grew wild once more. Some believed the humans had discovered technologies far beyond the galaxy's reach, that their silence had been years of study and invention, turning their small world into the cradle of something unstoppable. Others swore the humans had allied with forces from beyond known space, learning secrets from the void itself. No rumor could be proven, yet the fear spread faster than truth ever could. And the truth was already terrifying enough. The council gathered again, but this time the chamber shook with panic. Some leaders screamed for immediate war, demanding fleets be sent to Earth before the humans could rise further. Others shouted back in horror, warning that even one ship had paralyzed their technology, that even one voice had shaken their people. They argued until their voices grew hoarse, but none could find an answer. For every moment they debated, Earth's words continued to echo, calm and relentless, stripping them of their pride. In secret bunkers beneath the largest capitals, rulers met away from the public eye. They whispered of hidden plans, of weapons untested, of alliances born of desperation. Yet none could ignore the feeling that it was already too late. Humanity had chosen the time to speak, and that meant they had already decided the next step. The galaxy no longer controlled the future. Earth did. The young officer listened again and again, replaying the message until the words felt carved into his very bones. He realized something that chilled him more than anything else. The humans had not revealed themselves fully. They had spoken only words, shown only glimpses, displayed only one ship. If this was what they offered in silence, what would they show when they chose to act? He closed his eyes and whispered into the empty chamber, "This is not the end. This is the beginning." And across the galaxy, in the deepest silence of the night, countless others whispered the same thought, each in their own tongue, in their own way. The silence of Earth had ended, but what followed was not relief, it was dread. For humanity had spoken, and their words were not a promise of peace nor a threat of war, but something greater, something heavier, the declaration of power. And the galaxy knew with a cold certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The galaxy was no longer the same after Earth's voice filled the stars. Days passed, yet the words still echoed everywhere. We were silent to learn. We were silent to grow. Now we speak, and you will listen. Every empire, every colony, and every ship heard them, and none could erase the sound from their minds. Streets that were once full of laughter and trade now buzzed with fear. Citizens argued in markets, some demanding their leaders bow to Earth before it was too late, others shouting for war before humanity grew stronger. Families packed their homes in panic, trying to escape border world's nearest sol, believing they would be the first to fall if conflict erupted. In the great council chamber, chaos reigned. The rulers, who once mocked Earth's silence, now screamed at one another in desperation. Some demanded fleets be sent at once to surround Sol, to crush the humans before they rose fully. Others warned that such a strike would be suicide, pointing to the patrol fleet that vanished and the scouts that never returned. The chamber was filled with noise, claws pounding on tables, tails thrashing, voices cracking under the weight of fear. But one truth lay beneath the shouting. No empire wanted to be the first to test Earth's strength. The elder stood once more, his voice soft yet clear, cutting through the chaos. "You do not understand," he said, his eyes heavy with sorrow. "They have already chosen their path. Their silence was not weakness, it was patience. Their voice is not a request, it is command. You argue about war and peace as if the choice belongs to you. It does not. The choice belongs to them." His words fell like stones, silencing the chamber. For a long moment no one spoke, because deep down they all knew he was right. Across the galaxy, fleets mobilized, but none dared move closer to Sol. Warships gathered at borders, weapons gleaming, soldiers marching in drills. Yet it was not preparation for attack, it was fear disguised as strength. Colonies closest to Earth fortified themselves, building defenses they knew would not hold if humanity truly chose to strike. In private, commanders admitted the truth to their crews. No number of ships, no wall of weapons, could stop an enemy that had mastered silence and returned with such certainty. The young officer at the listening post remained at his console, staring at the empty black of Sol's skies. He replayed the transmission again and again until he could hear it even in his dreams. He began to notice something that others overlooked, small pauses between the words, faint pulses hidden in the static. He realized they were not just speaking to the galaxy. They were testing it, measuring its reaction, studying how fear spread. It was not only a message, it was an experiment, and the galaxy had already failed the test. Rumors spread faster than light. Some claimed they saw dozens of human ships rising from Earth's orbit at night, their glowing veins burning against the darkness. Others whispered of new signals buried in the static, warnings too complex to translate. A few even believed the humans had sent agents into alien worlds, watching silently, waiting for the moment to reveal themselves. No proof was ever shown, but it did not matter, because fear did not need proof. Fear had already become truth. Meanwhile, in the quiet corners of the galaxy, some voices spoke differently. Among ordinary people, there were those who saw Earth's return not as a threat, but as hope. They remembered the old stories not of human fury, but of human loyalty, of alliances forged in blood and sacrifice, of soldiers who stood by their friends even when the galaxy abandoned them. These voices whispered that perhaps Earth's words were not a promise of destruction, but a demand for respect. Yet such whispers were drowned quickly by fear, for fear shouted louder than hope. The council fractured. Old alliances crumbled as empires accused each other of planning secret pacts with Earth. Trust vanished, and in its place suspicion grew. Even among allies, fleets pointed weapons at one another, their commanders unsure who would betray them first when humanity's next word arrived. The galaxy, once united in mocking Earth, was now divided, broken by a silence that had turned into power. And then, after days of tension, another message came. It was short, only a few words, but they struck deeper than all the rest. The voice returned, calm as ever, carried across every channel, every frequency, into every home and every heart. "We are watching." The words were soft, but they fell heavier than any fleet of warships. Leaders paled, soldiers trembled, and citizens cried. The galaxy knew then that Earth did not need to move its fleets or fire its weapons. The knowledge that they were being watched was enough to paralyze entire civilizations. The young officer whispered the words to himself, his eyes wide, "We are watching." He felt the weight of it, the certainty that no secret was hidden, no plan unseen, that Earth's silence had always been more than absence, it had been observation. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the stars, and understood at last. The humans had returned not with noise, but with silence, not with threats, but with certainty. And certainty was more terrifying than war. Across the galaxy, the future hung suspended like a blade above the necks of empires. Some prepared to kneel, others prepared to fight, but all knew the same truth. The silence of Earth had ended, and nothing would ever be the same again.